you guys are all over the world, and that's awesome. And I want to ask you a quick question about when you step into, what you inherit and how you lean on the relationships that you've brought throughout your career, you've kind of made along the way, where and how you sort of tackle that as far as bringing folks into your organization, plugging them into roles, and almost like in my head, I'm sort of like picturing you dumping in, looking at this organization and opening your Rolodex and going, all right, this guy fits here, this guy fits here. And I just kind of want to ask for your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. It may be one of the most important questions in building any business. Businesses generally start with people, and finding, placing, selecting, and being methodical about how you build and orchestrate teams is inherent to any successful business. And I look at it like a Rubik's Cube, or that professional version of Match.com, where you're trying to balance people's competencies, skills, hopes, dreams, strengths in a giant paella, and hope to come out the other side with the right mix of complementary people. But when you're building teams, there's the natural forming, storming, norming, performing challenges. And so as an HR practitioner, how you accelerate the opportunity for teams to come together and hit their stride can be part of your talent culture strategy. In our case, we look at ourselves as a culture company and an experience company cleverly disguised as a hospitality company. And so it allows us to think about the importance of internal promotion, advancement, selection, 2 moves ahead in the chessboard. And so we disproportionately provide strategic thinking and planning around internal advancement of our people, because if we get the culture right, great things happen.
Yeah.
And so that's a
culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Amen.
That's the Peter Drucker one. When you talk about the storm and norm, and you're talking about bringing teams together and getting them to gel, talk to me about, I mean, you can't really microwave that stuff, but how do you approach when you bring folks together? Because sometimes, presumably, it's existing folks that are with the company and maybe a person or 3 or 5 that you've brought in, and that all needs to gel.
Yeah, I think in the context of the earlier comment of speed of trust, I think you create conditions. So conditions of learning, part of the leadership role is to help set the stage, set the table, provide the backdrop for people to build authentic, connected relationships in genuine ways. You can't manufacture authenticity. Right. What we can do is create opportunities and moments of magic for that to be discovered. We can facilitate that and accelerate that through assessments and conversation, commonality of values, language. Often companies will use a tool like StrengthsFinder as a way to help people discover more about themselves and find better ways to apply that in building that connective relationship with others.
I wonder your thoughts, because now what I'm hearing is you're using your vast expertise to sort of solicit data almost out of people and put together the right folks. Do you have thoughts on AI's introduction to HR and some of these sorts of, when you're building teams, if big data knows who fits together, maybe they help? Or I'm curious about where you see AI fitting into HR, and if you're almost that John Henry, where the parable of the guy who's fighting the machine, building the train tracks, and he outperforms it because he really believes in people. And I'm just curious, someone like you with your experience at your level, to maybe let's touch on AI and HR.
Yeah, I mean, a fascinating question, because I think there is a balance of high tech and high touch. And most of us are trying to think through the pendulum and where does that pendulum swing in any business, in particular for our organization. Technology can enable speed of decision-making. It can enable capability and provide more algorithmic validity and more scientific thinking that would help an organization reach an outcome faster. So there is a place for AI and enabling technology that can help build organizations, but we're inherently human. And most organizations are irrational. Simon Sinek, I think, says it best in terms of start with why and how people make decisions. And so you can't reduce the nature of being human to a computer.
Man. So I want to pivot a little bit and get into specifically any of your background with when you're working with teams and you're sort of brought in, and we talked a little bit earlier about buzzwords like conflict resolution being one, but Maybe team dynamics and some of your thoughts on that field?
I'd say team dynamics. When I hear that, I hear team building, and I hear a few. I'm going to just give you 3 of the top key things that when I think about team building and team dynamics that I think are fundamental. Trust. That means trusting yourself and being able to some degree, trust others, which is a big biggie for most of us. Connection and relationship. And the last one is mindful vulnerability. You cannot relate to people if you are unwilling, truly relate and truly connect with other people, if you're unwilling to be vulnerable. But when we talk about vulnerability in the workplace, we're not talking about an overflow of excessive emotion, unless there's something that warrants that.
That's right.
People pass away. COVID was a nightmare. And there were so many other things, right? Trauma that's happening in the news to different groups of people. Like, it's a lot going on. So of course, common sense isn't so common, but let's take that into consideration. But outside of those bigger issues, let's not use vulnerability in a toxic way, right? To force people's hands, to pressure them or manipulate them into acting a certain way, into getting so that you can get away with certain things in the workplace. We've all been there. We all know what we're talking about. But what we want to do instead is employ mindful vulnerability. That means being open to sharing a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about the ways that you're feeling or things you're experiencing, even in your personal life with colleagues or people in the workplace. Just doesn't have to be a ton, but just open up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the foundation and the crux of relationship.
Yeah.
And that's how people begin to see you as a human being and not just as a role you play in the workplace. And trust, this is the one thing I'll say about that. So trust is about knowing that we've made it this far. That means we've already fixed mistakes. We've lived through mistakes. We've messed up at work and we've cleaned it up. We've learned how to own our issues to some degree. We've pivoted. We've overcome. You've done so much. We've gotten up the ladder in a lot of cases. If you're an executive leader, you've moved yourself through your career. Look how far you've come, right? And if we know that, then already there is foundation for trusting yourself because you know that whatever's coming, you'll be able to adapt. And that goes from the big picture to the little picture in terms of engaging and connecting with people. You know that even if you need to have a difficult, challenging conversation with someone, you're gonna be able to move through it. It's not gonna be perfect because nothing is, but you can always pivot and come back and say, hey, this is going in a direction I didn't want it to go. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's where I want to bring us back to.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of tools and you've gotten so far already. So really focusing on that trust, that connection point, which comes from mindful vulnerability, is how you really build effective, strong, connected teams. The people that are going to go a little bit of the extra mile for you because they care, because they know that you do.
This feels like part art, part science, right? Where you kind of need to play with that vulnerability a little bit. And it reminds me of the sort of philosophical principle of like the mask, right? And so I'm wearing this mask to sort of hide myself, my true self, number one, and number two, to curate what I show you.
100%.
And which mask I put on or how much I really take off and expose and show is that kind of mindful vulnerability, I think, is what I'm sort of,
I think you get it. You really get it. Yeah.
Our emotional state dictates the quality of our life. So wouldn't we want to have complete control over that? I recognize that a lot of times, especially in leadership roles, we get so many like self-centered thoughts. And I don't mean that it's not the same as selfish. Self-centered is when we're actually trapped like within ourself and we're thinking for others. We're assuming what other people are thinking about us. We're very, very preoccupied with how we appear, that we're going to get in trouble. I mean, we're really just children and our meat kept growing, right? let's face that. All of us have some form of insobriety, right? And I think of it like this. Think of insobriety as you had an experience as a child or many experiences as a child, and you imprinted that as something about you. So meaning I'm always going to get in trouble. I'm not good enough. I'm not important. I'm going to be rejected. Fill in the blank, right? I can't do it. So once that belief is stuck inside of you, then what happens is you're flooded with emotion because of that belief. So everything you say to me right now, I could filter through that belief. It's like, oh gosh, I'm not good enough. I'm not important. I'm not doing a great job. And then I'm going to be flooded with emotion. Now here's what's cool. Emotions are chemicals. That's it. Like, I just want to make emotions more objective and not as scary and confusing. They're just chemicals in the body that we've labeled with things like fear, embarrassment, anger, resentment. And so once I'm flooded with this chemical, adrenaline and cortisol, I'm actually intoxicated. I want you to think about the last time, right? You were emotionally out of control. And you're like, yeah, I was kind of drunk. I feel like I was drunk. I had no control. I had no power of choice over what happened next for the most part. You know, maybe I was yelling, or maybe I avoid, or maybe I reach for alcohol, or maybe I reach for attention, and I do something that I would never consciously choose. And so that is what I call an emotionally triggered behavior. It's the thing that happens when we're under the influence of our emotion. Now, every single person has this. So I want you to have this level of, oh, good, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that has this, right? Even though I'm a leader, I have the right to have this, because everybody does. So I really want to just give that space for people to recognize that you all have it, but there's one flavor that's special for you. Like, what's your belief? What's your behavior that you use to protect yourself, right? Or to fight, or to be right? And what's your emotional addiction? Because like anything, when we have a chemical, we become addicted to it. So especially if you've been making this chemical your entire life, you can imagine how many training reps you've had in practicing making that chemical.
Yeah, I think that's super fascinating. In fact, I remember one time I heard an expression that never left me, which was, there's no such thing as venting. You're training for the next time. So when you have something come upon you, and what you do with that is get angry, then the next time something comes upon you, it's going to be a little easier to get angry, a little quicker to get angry, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You are actually relying in that moment on a child's interpretation, because it's something you stored in your body and your brain as, this is what this situation means about me. And it's the child's interpretation from the past. And then we react to that. So really there's no real, there's nothing happening in our day-to-day life where we're emotionally dysregulated or offended or really like acting out. That doesn't come from the past, because as an adult, you would assume, oh, well, I'm an adult, I am mature, right? But age doesn't promise maturity, right? Sure. Your role, your position, like who you are, your skill set does not promise maturity or the ability to handle complex situations, especially when emotions are involved.
And I think that circles us back to, when you say the ability to handle, that's kind of at the heart of what I'm looking to get at with you, which is, again, to say, if I'm expected to perform on a daily basis, and I'm expected to be a leader, an HR practitioner, a CFO, fill in the blank from a professional standpoint, I need to grapple with all of the inbound kind of slings and arrows of the folks I work with, the circumstances that are hitting upon me, traverse that, and then go do my role as effectively as possible.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have this humility component of understanding, well, I have a little bit of emotional insobriety, or a lot, which means the people coming to me also do too. So think about it like this. What happens at work affects your home life. What happens at home deeply affects you at work, right? So think about that. You're fighting with your spouse. You have issues communicating with your kid. You may have addiction issues at home. The human experience is very common in that way. So let that be a binding thing. Whenever you're discussing something with somebody who's emotionally charged and you're staying balanced, you have a much greater clarity and ability to navigate and lead that person without conflict, by making sure that they feel heard, that feel understood, and they're not embarrassed about their outburst, right? Most of us are so afraid that we're going to get in trouble if we have an outburst. But when somebody has an outburst in front of us, we actually can be the calm in the storm. Let it be easy. Let it be not a big deal. Calm their chemistry down. Now, all of a sudden, you're having a real conversation.
And so if you're an HR practitioner listening to this, is your recommendation that we can shift this maybe in like managers trainings and try to permeate that through the organization? Or like, how can this translate to the employer's landscape?
Very good question. I think there's multiple levels. So starting with working on yourself, because there's no better model than who we are. So regardless of what layer or what level we're at as managers, when you start working on yourself, and again, that vulnerability word is going to keep coming up, right? And then you can be vulnerable with the process, then the people that you have working with you and working for you see that not only are you trying to help them, it's a process that you're working on yourself. It's not just this, well, I'm going to put a Band-Aid to try to fix all of these pieces. Because I feel we're often doing that because we know we need to help people with their mindset. So what are we going to do? What's the easy checkboxy thing that I can use to move forward? But as managers, this is not a one-stop shop. Everyone you're working with is very unique and very individualized. And so spending time to get to know people, helping managers understand good questions to ask, good ways to reach out to their people and be supportive. And then a bigger piece of it that I think we also need to start integrating throughout the work culture is also celebrating success. We so often move from like, oh, well, even when it's huge successes, well, we achieved that success. We did so great. Now we're moving on to the next. And we don't take time to pause and really reflect on what went well, what would we do different? And let's celebrate not only the huge successes, but also the little milestones along the way. And to me, it all boils down to culture, helping managers create a culture of not just acceptance, but of, like I said, celebration and getting to know your people and helping your people understand that you are there to support them.
Is there a danger of getting a little like rah-rah-y or woo-woo-y? Like, when we celebrate these things, I'm curious if you have thoughts between celebrations at the natural conclusion, to your point, of a major project. So I don't know, we're putting on the Oscars, for lack of a better word. It's the day after, and we did a lot of work. We had the big event and it happens, right? So the natural milestones at the conclusion of whatever the project might have been, and also perhaps the natural on-ramps that the calendar gives us. So maybe quarterly, annually, whatever that is, and sort of kind of your thoughts on a cadence and a size of celebration?
Yes, and that's a very good point, because we are all very capable of recognizing falsehood and like when people are not being genuine, right? And so I think there's a massive misnomer around what celebrations need to look like. Yes, if you're putting on the Oscars, the next day, hopefully you give your people a day off. But if not...
Yeah. Next morning, 8 a.m., I want them all here for a free cup of coffee. Am I right?
I'm going to have balloons in the background. It's going to be great. But it really should be, the celebration should match what happened. And so...
Yeah, the size and scope of the accomplishment. Yes. Yeah.
And so that's, I think, where we fall into kind of a slump, because we know to celebrate the big things. We know to do, let's have August birthdays, right? And bring in a cake and do the thing. And let's have a massive celebration when we achieve whatever this huge goal that our organization set out to achieve. And all of that matters. But you can't do that all the time. And if you did it all the time, obviously it would lose its novelty and everyone would be like, oh, look, we're doing, look, it's Cake Tuesday.
Yeah, mandatory fun is the joke, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so often I think we need to reframe what we mean by celebration. Because for many of us, especially if you're someone who's introverted or doesn't like a lot of attention, big celebrations are not going to make you feel valued. They're not going to make you feel appreciated or supported. Yeah. Where popping in my office and saying, hey, I saw what you did today in that meeting. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah.
Or I noticed that your team was struggling and you overcame that. Well done. It can be an email. Better if it can be a quick face-to-face conversation, not awkward, not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And most importantly, very sincere.
Yeah.
Very sincere.
Yeah.
And I think often we feel like we need to have the right wording or we need to have the right time. And mostly people just want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be seen. They want to be recognized for the things they do. The big celebrations are often expected and understood. It's the little pieces along the way. And And that's what can make a massive difference in someone's mindset of, look, somebody saw me, they heard me, they recognize the work that I'm doing. And when you look at the research on like job retention, so often that's what employees say. I want to be seen, I want to be heard, I want to know that my work is valued, not just like, oh, well, good job, you did your job, and now we're moving on.
Maybe to bring it back on a corporate side, as you mentioned, maybe we're rolling out a new payroll system, or maybe we are, like shifting our typical client base. So maybe, I don't know, we're a large roofing company that's getting into solar or something, right? Something big is happening at the company level. And I think, one coming down the pike is, there's a lot of AI stuff. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of, SOPs, the way we did things. And one of my favorite expressions is, what got you here won't get you there. So if for some reason or another, we as an organization are making this pivot, we work on the awareness and those sort of 5 points. We work on the desire aspect of it and kind of, as you said, getting people's hearts and minds on board in a way. And then that kind of leads us to this third pillar, right? The knowledge part.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, one of my favorite quotes in the whole world is disrupt or be disrupted. And not that I love to disrupt people's worlds, but if we don't kind of walk into that on the front end, it's going to get us on the back end. So we might as well just kind of embrace that piece. And kind of in talking about knowledge too, maybe a more complicated knowledge desire example is I had a stakeholder that we were working with that we realized in assessing, we're like, okay, we just need knowledge. We need resources. We need training. We were so excited. But we got down into it and realized actually part of the reduction in adoption was that we had the wrong people making decisions. And we had the wrong people in the wrong roles as far as how to really help move this content, this topic, this type of service forward in our organization. And so knowledge, desire, awareness, where you're bouncing sometimes, right?
Sure.
Knowledge, obviously I love because I'm a trainer. So, I mean, this is a place I adore. And again, lots of methodology and nerdiness that I could talk about here. But knowledge is really about how do I do my job? Again, so I'm an instructional designer by trade. I'm a senior instructional designer. That's my primary job title. And then I just love change management. And so telling people things isn't knowledge, right? Helping people know what to do their job well and letting them practice behavior, that's knowledge. That is how we really see behavior shifts. I think people look at knowledge and they think about what. And really, we should have already talked some about the what in awareness, right? Knowledge is how. Really help people understand, how do you want them to change? What's the behavior? What are the exact steps? What's the thing? Like, what is this going to look like? My favorite questions are, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What does success look like? How are we going to measure it? And if we can answer those questions, we can really help people with the knowledge and the training side of things.
So I know you said there's a lot of methodology that you can kind of dive down, you can spend a ton of time on. Can I ask you for just a pearl or a nugget or two?
Yeah, it depends on how deep you and your organization or your sphere are in training. From the simplest things, I would say you need to do an analysis before you just start making content that you think is great. So you need to understand your learner. People think I just need to understand the topic. No. You need to understand your learner. Remember, this is change. This is about people, right? It's people change. So what's going on with your learner? What's going on with your organization? And so that helps you really understand what uniquenesses do I need to consider when I'm helping them then with this topic. And also, do you need to teach them the whole topic, or is there just 20% of it that's changing, right? So do an analysis first. If I could just say anything to people who maybe aren't trainers out there, is like, believe in the methodology of do an analysis first, right? 80% planning, 20% execution. It will pay off, I promise, in your ROI. If you're more nerdy in the training space, I love bringing an agile scope we have a framework called ADDIE or SAM. If you're in our world, we've done a lot of work and I've spent years, I'm a tech junkie. So I love agile, Scrum, and I was kind of in that world for a while and then came to training. And so learning how to take those concepts and go, how can I be iterative? How can I give training out in phases so I can deliver faster? But it also then gives me the flexibility to not have to do everything perfect on round one. It's like, let me give you this bite, then I can work into this bite. And so I think that in the training space, don't be a box checker. Do not just give content for content. It is such a waste of time. People think it saves time. Well, we just got to get this out because we had an audit finding. No. It's not worth it. It is not worth it. You will spend more time than you save.